Welcome to What Happens Next. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Catherine Morgan. But if it's your first time on What Happens Next, let me explain what we do on this channel. We are the channel dedicated to better, more nuanced conversations about the crossroad a lot of us find ourselves in our 50s and 60s, doing really well in our careers and our businesses, and then get to a point where we go, oh, what happens next? Is it retirement or is it that next chapter? And what do we need to think about when we're thinking about the next chapter of our life? And I'm really pleased today to be joined by somebody I've known for it must be about 10 years now, Catherine. We've known each other, to explore the stories that we tell ourselves about money, but not only that, what purpose means in the later chapters of our life and how we can define that. But let's talk about something more important to kick the conversation off. Beaches, right? Because I've just moved 7 or 8 months ago to a place that's very near a beach. You're 8 minutes from a beach. But the question I've got to ask is, what's the best beach you've ever been to?
Oh, what a question. Well, I have to say my local beach, because genuinely, if you haven't been to Jersey and the Channel Islands, it's like this little magical place that many people actually have been to, often on honeymoons and things, especially if you're in your kind of 50s, 60s, 70s now. And it's just gorgeous, like, so I live on the west side of the island. They say west is best in Jersey, and we live on the west side, and it's just stunning. It's gorgeous sandy beaches, but then you can go on the other side of Jersey, and it's all like rocky, and you can pick off the oyster shells straight from the
amazing.
And it's so different. It's got such a different feeling on either side. So yeah, I love Jersey.
So your local beach is the best beach you've ever been to. I think my one of my favourite beaches is up in Scotland called Lunan Bay.
Ooh.
And nobody knows about it because it's over this massive sand dune that you've got to literally scramble to climb over. And when you come over the sand dune, it's just this cliff lined beach that is desolate, but one of the most peaceful places in the world. Now, because it's on the northeast coast of Scotland, it can be a bit nippy now and again, Catherine. I've got to be perfect. In the summer, it is beautiful.
Maybe it's the fact that they've made you climb this sand dune as well, makes the pleasure of the experience once you hit the top even more so.
Well, I mean, this might be a conversation that we can have today, because I'm having a lot of conversations with my clients at the minute about whether we sort of need to, when we're thinking about new challenges in our lives, we need to go through a bit of effort to really savor the experience. It's that eudaimonic well-being, isn't it? It's like, actually, how do we make an effort and learn something new? I'm learning to play paddle tennis at the minute, and I'm rubbish, but I'm loving the experience of being a beginner again. And I wonder if there's something actually where you've got to make a bit of effort to learn how to get good at something that makes life worthwhile. But we can definitely explore that subject. But before, I know all about you, but before we dig a bit deeper into that, tell everybody on What Happens Next about you.
Gosh, what a question. So I will simply say that I help people to feel safe with money. Right? Because when we think about money, money conjures up so many different emotions, so many different reactions. And even just thinking about money sometimes can send people into a spiral of stress or anxiety, and I think that the relationship that we have to money is the most important relationship that we have, because really money is just a mirror reflection. Is the way that we feel about money is the way that we feel about ourselves. And so I feel like my purpose in life is to help people to feel safe to receive money, whether that be through your salary and your employment, or whether that be in business, feeling safe to receive money, and then feeling safe to actually keep it.
Yeah.
And there'll be many people listening to this that feel very, very safe and happy to keep plenty of resources and money topped up in savings accounts, and really enjoy the safety that money brings, seeing their money in cash or seeing the money sitting there, and therefore may struggle with potentially making decisions that removes that safety, that might be conversations about investing that money or doing something different with that money. And there'll also be people listening to this that will be the complete opposite and can't spend it quickly enough. And that was me. That was me when I was a financial advisor. I was a financial advisor for about 20 years in different roles, and had a terrible relationship with money. I knew everything there was to know about budgeting and not spending more than you made, and the benefits of compound investing and putting money aside, and I wasn't doing any of it myself.
What was your personal turning point?
I had several, but I think the biggest one for me was when my second son was born. So this was back in 2013. We almost lost Thomas twice. So he was very poorly at birth.
Yeah.
And we were told there was like a 50-50 chance that he was going to survive. And 5 weeks later, having heard that news, we almost lost him again to meningitis. And what that personal experience taught me was that I didn't feel worthy of receiving. I didn't feel worthy of being a good mum, also trying to work in, as a financial advisor. I didn't feel worthy of asking for help when I was struggling with my two boys. And I really sat in a lot of anxiety as a mum. I was trying to get everything perfect. I was trying to, make sure that the children were happy and weren't crying and being fed on time and sleeping on time and all of these different things. And my experience really taught me that the relationship that I had with money was that I would try and control money by trying to control the feelings that I felt behind it. And so that led me into this spiral of receiving money, not feeling worthy of holding it. And so I would just spend it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And I would find any reason or excuse to get rid of this money, whether it was somebody asking me to borrow money, or whether it was just the car breaks down, the washing machine breaks down, buying all these, nice clothes and things, in a real pursuit of just trying to feel an empty void in my life where I didn't feel worthy of receiving love.
So interesting. And I think trying to fill the gap in our own well-being through spending is such an interesting subject, isn't it? Because it's like that hole's never going to be filled by that. Do you think that's okay, so if somebody's watching this and recognizes that feeling, what's the first sort of tiny step they can take towards a healthier relationship, however you want to describe it, with the way they consider and spend money?
Yeah, the first stage is awareness. And it's all about understanding the meaning that you give to money. So in that experience for me personally, the meaning that I was giving money is that I felt like by having more money, it would make me a bad person, because money equals greed, money equals judgment, money equals manipulation, because that was my experience of money growing up, is that money was used to manipulate women. It was used as if you don't pay this maintenance on time, you won't get to see the kids at the weekend conversation, right? And so my perception was that money was a tool that was used to manipulate women. So I, of course, didn't want to hold on to money, because I didn't want people to
Because you
think that
thought
I
that
was,
money was a judgment on you as a person, as somebody
yeah,
emotionally manipulative, right?
yeah, exactly that. And so
So
that's why
interesting.
as soon as I received it, I would just get rid of it as quickly as possible, because money didn't represent something positive for me. It was something where it represented power, and power in the wrong way. It represented manipulation and greed. It represented a lot of masculine, like it was okay for men to make the money, but not for women.
So
And
interesting.
actually, when I did a lot of work, one of the things I trained in most recently in the last 5 years is inherited family trauma work. And what was really interesting for me is that actually a lot of the beliefs I carried about money had also come down through the generations. And in my lineage, it was perfectly acceptable for men to make money, which it is in many families. You know, it was the main, men are the main breadwinners. They bring in most of the household income. And so for women, it was more about managing the household purse. It
Right.
wasn't about investing conversations. It was about being frugal, you know, managing the household purse. And so it wasn't acceptable for women to be very financially successful, right?
Yeah.
And actually, when I look back at my career, even as an advisor, I was earning really good money. And when I started my business, I remember the conversation with my mom in the summer of 2022, I think it was, not long after lockdown. And she came to visit me in Jersey. And I remember my bank statement arriving that day. And I opened it. This is my business account. I opened it up. I put it on the side. And my mom looked at my bank statement and she picked it up and she went, £50,000. You made £50,000 this month in your business. And I was like, no. Like, yes, we did, but it was a complete fluke. Like, we had a big launch. You know, it doesn't happen like that normally. And then I sat back thinking, that was my reaction was actually that was a very regular occurrence that year in my business. But I felt so shameful that, well, how do I get to keep money like this when my mum had to struggle financially as a single mum, growing, like bringing up 4 children? And the shame for me of, well, it's not acceptable for women to make that level of wealth, right? I felt guilty. I felt shame that this isn't for women. This is for men.
What would you know what I'm interested in? I mean, I said, Catherine, that we might go into a tangent 10 minutes in, but it's taken about 2.5 minutes. So I'm not apologizing for that. What was your mum's reaction to that? So you tried to apologize for that. How did your mum, because I look at that and go, if one of my girls did that, I'd be proud that they had managed to build something like you have to sort of engender success. How did your mum feel about it?
So her reaction was very like, wow, gosh. It was almost shock.
Yeah.
Like, wow, like how did you do that? How is that even possible? And I think a lot of it is to do with capacity. Like, to get to that place, I had to really do a lot of work on myself to even hold the capacity that I could be financially this successful with a bunch of money beliefs that were telling me that I don't deserve to have wealth. Wealth is used to manipulate other people. And certainly in my family lineage, when women had money, they lost it very quickly. And there were lots of examples in my family where sudden loss, where husbands passed away, people were killed in car accidents, like things where money was there and all of a sudden it was gone. And this is where, when we look at the inherited family patterns, some of the feelings that we experience around money don't even belong to us. They are literally passed through
through generations, right?
Yeah. And they're not just stories, they are passed through epigenetically. And what I mean by that is that, let's say, for example, your mom was under significant financial stress when she was carrying you, right? All of those feelings live in our bodies. Emotions don't live in the brain, they live in the body. And those emotions can be passed down through up to 7 generations through our DNA.
Right.
So anything that our parents, grandmothers, grandparents, grandparents didn't heal, because let's face it, they didn't have the resources and the tools available that we have now.
Sure.
Those unhealed traumas or emotions are locked into their DNA and literally passed down through the generations.
I'll tell you the other thing that fascinates me is the cultural change, right? So I think like my dad's and my granddad's generation, there was a instinctive, it was quite traditional in nature, and and the guy did go out and earn, and the gender roles were fairly formal back, in my family growing up, and my granddad's family. I've got two daughters, and I want them to do whatever they want to do with their life and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
So how do we, if these feelings are passed down generationally, how do we make sure that we're not sticking on to those outdated concepts in our own life?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think there's a difference between culturally where we are and what has already been. So if we take the first one, like culturally, where are we right now? Like, we've never been in a more exciting time where women are holding more wealth than men right now. Women are having conversations around money that we didn't have before. Women are investing very differently to men. So we're making different decisions around money, but we still have issues. We still have a gender pay gap. We still have a big wealth gap where, men will typically carry more in wealth investments than women will. I think the gender pay gap now is still on average like £92,000 less in total wealth for women than for men. This is like 35% wealth gap. But yet women are living longer. So we need money to last longer. Right. And so, but we're having conversations about that now in a way that we didn't do before. And it seems to be much more accepting now when women are coming to those conversations, as opposed to, let's not forget, it wasn't until the 1970s that we could actually even have our own bank accounts. Right.
So what changed?
So I think there's a few things that's changed. I think we are living in a different world to where we were living 50 years ago. We're living in a different world to where we were 2 years ago. If you look at the evolvement of technology and AI and how that's completely changing the way that we are going to create wealth in the world. And you look at crypto and Bitcoin and the digital platforms, money's not physical anymore. It's not even, because sometimes I can't even see it. And if we go down the decentralization route where banks no longer control how we spend money or how money is held, it's going to completely change the way that money exists in the world. And so I think the reason that we are where we are today is because we've had lots of opportunities to create more gender balance between it being acceptable for men and for women to be back at work after having children and having their families, for men to actually take time out of work when they have families, for men not to be the main breadwinners necessarily, that we're living in a very different cultural paradigm than we were, 50 years ago. And this has presented much more opportunities.
I think it's a really interesting one, because I'm the reason What Happens Next exists is because I have had so many conversations over the past 3 to probably 8 years with men and women, and it's really interesting when we look at so we've got a quiz on the What Happens Next website that people take, and it's all about well-being at this stage of their of the sort of person who's taken their lives. And what's really interesting is men typically have high levels of financial well-being and high levels of occupational and intellectual well-being, we call it. So they're really like, they feel really successful at work. Where they're really low is social well-being and community well-being. And physical well-being stays like fairly level, and there's we've had a decent number of people take this quiz now, so even though it's not an academic study, it raises some things that are interesting to talk about. I look at that and go, like, one of the greatest joys of my life, and I've been lucky enough to build a good business and be successful financially, but I think I'm with Esther Perel, who talks about the fact that the quality of lives are determined by the quality of our relationships. So do we as blokes need to think about whether we put too much prominence on money and career success instead of looking at it in the mix? What do you think?
It's so interesting. Like, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think traditionally and historically, a lot of emotional pressure has been put on men to be the providers.
Yeah, interesting.
Whether that is purposefully or just because that is how we are designed. Men are at very nature hunter-gatherers, and the women are the caregivers, right? But interesting for me, the language that we use with ourselves is the gateway to everything. Like, if you want to change your relationship with money, you change your language. Now, where do we get that from? Where do those beliefs come from? Well, they come from various sources of influence. They come through the media. They come through movies that we watch. If you think about wealthy women as an example in movies, they're seen to be greedy and bitches and not very nice people to be around, whereas men with wealth are seen to be sexy and they have a greater sense of belonging in the community, because unless you had land or title, then what was your purpose in society? And so I think it's time that we actually redefined wealth, because for too long, we've allowed society, even financial services to a degree, to define wealth as assets minus liabilities. Well, so if I don't have a lot of assets, does that mean I'm not deserving, to feel wealthy? I've never heard a single person say to me that wealth is how much money they have in their bank account. Right. Never once. The definition of wealth being attributed to how much money you have is just a definition that has been given to us. And we have to change this definition. Many people will feel a strong sense of well-being through their relationships. But yet, how much time do we allow ourselves to be in relationship? To have those deep connections, to finish work at 5 p.m. because that's when you're contractually you're not supposed to work after 5,
Go down the beach at 3, Catherine.
Go down the beach at 3.
But I think look, I hope that some of the conversations that people like you and I have about this nuance and thinking about what does a life well lived actually include. And look, let's not pretend it's not about money to a certain extent, because the lack of concern about thinking about my stories that I used to tell myself about money, it was coming from a place where growing up we didn't have much. So actually, knowing you've got financial security and having a good relationship with money is important, but wealth in balance in terms of lifestyle, I think, is an interesting conversation too.
I think for me, like, wealth is about the collective wealth. It's not an individual path of pursuit. And when you see wealth as something that is a collective, then you don't necessarily feel like you have to be striving for the next pay rise or staying in a job that you hate that's bringing you stress, and you're just waiting for that date when you turn 67 and someone can give you permission to go retire, because that's what the government tell us is the age that when you can retire, And I think that when you start to see wealth as something that is not in an individual pursuit, but in a collective pursuit, then you start to see life differently. You start to give yourself permission differently. You start to allow yourself to feel enriched by life experiences, many of which are completely free. Walking to the beach, enjoying the sunshine costs nothing.
I love that. You know what I also love? I love your mission. 1 million women becoming financially resilient is super bold, super ambitious, super achievable, but something that you can really strive for. But I'm really curious to understand where that process of getting to that point of going, that's what I want to aim for, or that's what I want to achieve, started. Tell me a bit about that goal, where it came from, and why it's so important to you.
Yeah, do you know, I'm going through a process right now of like real evolution in the work that I do, because I think for such a long time, being in corporate and being a woman in a financial services industry that was very dominated by men, I never felt like I could really be in my power. I never felt like I could be in a place of influence or leadership. And even now, as I'm talking to you, Chris, like I've been thinking about, well, why 1 million? Like, why only 1 million?
Yeah.
And why only women? Because when I started this business, the reason I started working with women is because it was easier for me to help people that I saw in myself. Like, it was easier for me to help people that I had gone through that journey, and I was able to support them to maybe, move from being an emotional spender into creating more financial stability and more financial resilience. But what I found as I've been building my businesses and my brand and the work I do in the world is that actually it isn't about men versus women. It isn't about just empowering women to be good with money. It's actually about empowering people to be in relationship to money together, so that it doesn't become a gender conversation. It isn't about how much wealth do women have and how much wealth do men have. It's how much do we have collectively. And actually, even just hearing this, like 1 million women, it feels like that's not relevant anymore. It feels like this is more about how do we help people to feel safe, to be in relationship to money. And that really is about being in relationship with themselves and living the most enriched version of their life, whatever that looks like for them.
You know what I'm glad of, while I was having this conversation, it's so interesting. I always think that I am alone, that my goals are always in a state of flux. Because I think about, you yes, you want to have clarity of whatever purpose looks like. But also, you should change your mind, right? As you evolve as a human being and stuff like that. So how clear are you on this new aspiration? And do you think, well, actually, I don't need to be entirely clear at this point because it's still in evolution? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think if you try and get absolute crystal clear clarity on anything, you'll be in that place of waiting for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that waiting space is something that we have become very conditioned to. It's waiting to leave your job, waiting to retire, wait
until it's perfect.
Once I get this qualification, then I'll do this. Or once my boss decides to leave, then I might retire. Or, we're in this waiting energy a lot. So I think for me, dropping into your intuition is one of the most powerful gifts that you can give to yourself. We know instinctively. We know when something feels right, when it doesn't feel right. We know when something's draining our energy, when it's fulfilling our energy. We know when we're having good conversations and we're in good relationships versus relationships that are not serving us. And I think that for me, I just work on, does this feel right in this moment? Yes or no? Great, let's go with it, and then just see what happens.
I love that. I love that sort of feeling your way along to a certain extent, so that you can get closer to whatever that looks like. There's a great, I mention it on What Happens Next all of the time. Actually, it's a great book by a guy called Bill Burnett called Design Your Life. And it talks about incremental, low-cost experimentation. So just doing stuff to help you work out what the next step is. And actually, that might mean failing. That might mean going down a road that you're not going to enjoy. That might mean, but trying stuff to help you understand what really makes you tick, I think is a really interesting concept, and something I've tried to adopt a bit more in my life. However, often when we're at that crossroads in our life, and I've got 5 clients at the minute, and I've spoke to over the past few weeks, who are going through a stage of, I'm terming it last pay slip syndrome. So they've all made the commitment to stop whatever they're doing permanently, either sell their business or stop work. They're trying to work out what's next. And the big challenge they've got is around purpose, because they're trying to redefine who they are as individuals. So identity is part of it, but also work out what that next step is in terms of purpose. What have you learned through your journey and through the people you've helped and through your experiences that can give us an insight into that?
Yeah, do you know, I think when people think about purpose, and this comes up in many times in our lives when we end up in this circle of routine, where everything is just Groundhog Day. It feels like the same thing is just happening over and over and over and over. And I think that purpose for me is all about how we feel. And consciously, it's about looking at all the different areas of our life and asking ourselves, does this feel on purpose? And how we know something feels on purpose is when it aligns into our values.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've spoken about this, Chris, before, about the values that we have are created very often before we were even born. They're very often created from the blueprint that we learn through our parents or our main caregivers. But what's interesting for me is that just because we have a value system, we learn more in the unlearning than we do sometimes in the learning. So you may be making decisions in your life right now based on what you feel like you should be doing. And those shoulding values, sounds like I'm swearing, doesn't it? The shoulding values are the ones that we potentially have just mirrored from previous experiences or from previous influences. But it's really interesting when you start to question, is that value something that really feels right? And I'm just trying to think of an example here where maybe somebody is staying in a job and not taking early retirement because they feel like they should be carrying that belief that they have to prove something. And very often it's to prove something to ourselves in pursuit of proving it to other people. And the question that I always invite of yourself here is like, well, what would happen if you were to understand what would be possible if you weren't living in that pursuit? What would be possible? It's all, you're almost going into this possibility thinking. This is something we actually teach in our financial coach certification framework. It's the very final piece where you explore the possibilities that exist. And the problem with this is that we don't allow ourselves time to think about possibility because we're so busy trying to live up to these expectations of what we think we should be doing and how we think we should be living our lives. And so when you drop into possibility, well, how do you do that? Walk on the beach, daydream, go take yourself away from your home, go somewhere without your phones, without technology, maybe by yourself, and just really think about, if you were celebrating your 100th birthday, and I just actually celebrated my granny's 100th birthday, right? And I would drop into, and you can do this through meditation, if you love meditating, or you've got a favorite track that you listen to, imagine yourself walking into a cottage and it's your 100th birthday. And as you walk into that cottage, all of the best, most important relationships that you've ever had over your life are in that room with you. And they're celebrating you and they're patting you on the back. Well done, Chris, for everything you've achieved. Like, look at the impact you've had in the world. Look at the impact you've had in your social circles, your local communities, your friends, your family, and yourself. What are you celebrating?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've just reread Bronnie Ware's book.
Oh, she's so, yeah,
Yeah.
Dying Wishes.
Yeah, and I think that, and funny enough, there's a video that I've just done for What Happens Next that talks about the lessons we learn from that. And I think those 5 lessons and thinking about how that applies to your own life are really powerful. Are really powerful. Because what, you know, do we spend more time at work because we feel we should? Do we put ourselves in this box because we think we should and we're not ourselves because we think we should? And I think if you're thinking about the questions, Bronnie Ware's book is a great place to start, I'd say, because it certainly made me think a lot about, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot on What Happens Next is, what does a life well lived look like? And actually, I think learning from the regrets of people like my great nan, who was 103 when she passed, and your nan, who was 100, and saying, how do we get closer to a life that when we get to that point, if we're lucky enough to, that we're really proud of, I think is really, really interesting.
And I think as well, like, I mean, my nan, she's hilarious, right? She drank like a fish, smoked like a chimney all of her life. She had she always talks about his fond memories of post-war, and she was, dancing with the Yanks, and, just the best life, right? But she also had a lot of trauma in her life as well. And I think sometimes as well, like, it's a really powerful question to ask yourself about, what is it I want for the future? And it's also about living in this moment today, because in reality, there is no such thing as time, because we don't know how long we've got left on this earth, right? We don't know. And so all we do know, the certainties in life, is right now, as of this moment, I'm sitting on my chair, I've got the sunshine out the window, and I'm chatting to you, Chris. That's what I know is true. And I know that by spending an hour with you, I'm going to feel really fulfilled. It's a thing that I love to do.
But let's set the expectations for layers low, and then I can exceed, Catherine. Let's go with...
But I've made that decision. I've made that decision to put an hour in my calendar to have this joyful conversation. And I think that very often we do wait, and it isn't really until we experience times where, we lose a loved one, or we lose our jobs, or our health deteriorates, that then we start to question what we want in life. So why are we waiting for these instances to happen? It's about, not just about planning for the future, it's also about being very, very present to what's happening right now.
But often it's because we believe we should, right? And if you take the examples from that Bronnie Ware book, I wished I would have lived a life, not what others expected me to do, but actually that was more authentic to myself. I think that teaches us a bit of the story.
And you do, as you get into I'm in my mid-40s now, right? But already I'm feeling this energy of, I don't really care what people think anymore. And I think as you get into later life, you do feel like that more. Lots of my clients in their 50s will say, I just don't really care now what people think. But again, it's like, why have we waited until that happens?
I don't know whether you just, I don't know is the answer. And I don't know whether you need to just go through some of those life experiences to get to the point where you go, actually, what is life truly about? And some people never do that, do they? We've got, I know I've spoken to people in their 70s who are still like head down because that's what they feel they need to do. But yeah, I think looking at life with a bit more balance and a bit more nuance, particularly when you got, like, I had a conversation with a brand new client yesterday who said, Chris, I've had a really successful career as an FD of this big business, a woman client who's just started working with us, and I realised I haven't seen my kids, and actually I'm questioning now whether the balance was right. And you just don't know, but thinking about
There's
it,
also no such thing as balance. Like, I think that puts so much pressure on ourselves when we ask ourselves that question, like, do I have balance in my life? It's like, does that even really exist?
what's a better question, do you think? Because balance doesn't exist, you're right. Because whatever balance is imperfect, isn't it? Because there's no such thing as perfect balance. But what's a better question to make sure that we're including all the important bits?
I think a better question to ask yourself is, where do I feel most fulfilled? And how can I complete that circle around myself? So when I think about fulfillment for me is in 5 different areas. It's fulfillment in health.
Yeah.
It's in career or vocation. It's in money. We do need a certain amount of money to be financially resourced. It's about relationships, and it's about spirituality. And by spirituality, I mean whether that's religion, whether it's source, God, universe, whatever that, whatever language speaks to you. And I think if you can think about, well, throughout your life, you're going to have more fulfillment in each of those areas. You're going to have more balance in some of those areas. And there are going to be times where a bomb will just go in your health pillar, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. If you just had a cancer diagnosis, like my client has recently, she's 32 years old, just had a full cancer diagnosis, stage 3, in her column, right? And she's gone all in on with a really positive mindset of, I'm so grateful this hasn't gone to stage 4. Yeah. Right. And she was at our conference at the weekend. She's lost all of her hair. She had this beautiful headscarf on. She has never once dropped into that energy of, poor me, why is this happening to me? She's just gone, okay, I now need to gather all of my support and close the circle around my needs in my health pillar right now, because that's the most important thing. Not about balance, not about worrying about other things, just right now we need to pull all resources into focusing on your health. And I think that if we can just give ourselves permission for life to have ebbs and flows and be out of balance, the less we try and control life. And the less we try and control life, the more fulfilled we become.
Yeah, I like that. It's what's important today, and as you say, that could be something completely different to try, like potentially this aspiration to achieve a balance might mean that we're not living today, right? That's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
So I know you talk about a lot about creating wealth as opposed to just making money. When you're teaching this stuff, help me understand how you define the difference and how that manifests itself in the actions people take.
The difference between creating wealth and creating money. Yeah. I mean, for me, money is just something that is used to exchange for something of value, whether that's time or whether that's energy or whether that is something physical. I'm going to give you this and you're going to give me this in exchange for that. Wealth is very much more about a state of being. It's about what we've just spoken about feeling fulfilled in different areas of our life. And so when we talk about creating more wealth, it's a very different conversation to creating more money. Creating more money is how do I use my tools, my expertise, my skills, my wisdom, my years of knowledge in this one area to make more money. Whereas the question of how do I create more wealth is very much more about how do I feel more joy, more satisfaction, more impacts more purpose in my life. It's a very different, it's more of a feeling question. It's like you embody wealth, you don't create it, you embody it.
And do you think you can create more wealth instantaneously?
100%. Like,
yeah,
you can literally feel more wealthy in an instant.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually really tap into this work until, you know, the last sort of few years, where I've really understood the power of what we call somatic work. And somatic work is, how do we feel in our bodies? Because a lot of the time we think we have to change our mindset, you know, change our beliefs, change our thoughts, change our mindset. But if your body doesn't feel safe to support that mindset, then you're just going to self-sabotage. You'll maybe hold that joy for a period of time, and then it will just disappear, because in your body there's some kind of imprint, belief system, there's an experience that your body's holding on to that is sending you into these fight, flight, freeze scenarios, you know. And so you can say to yourself, and you can have all your affirmations, you know, I am worthy of being a millionaire, let's say, but then you become a millionaire and then the body doesn't feel safe because there's some beliefs in there that it's not safe for you to be wealthy. Right. And so we just self-sabotage. And I think understanding that connection between the body and the mind is really powerful. And the way that we become and can step into this immediate feeling of wealth as a state of being is by just literally dropping down into the heart, you know. And you can drop down into the heart, and you can, and I do this if I'm working with clients, and I ask them to drop down into their heart, and first of all, just, you know, breathe in and breathe life in through their nose and out through their mouth. And then we get them to think about, when was a time when you felt love, appreciation, or gratitude?
Yeah.
And you sit in that memory. That memory might be a memory of the far past. It might be a recent memory. It might be of your wedding day, or the birth of your child, or the day that you retired, you know. And it's just sit in that memory, and then just bring a smile into your face, and just sit as long as you can with it, whether that's 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes, an hour, you know, and just bring that feeling of richness, of love and gratitude and appreciation into your body. And then anything can be happening around you and it wouldn't matter, because internally you are feeling resourced, you're feeling wealthy, you're feeling love. And love really is the thing that conquers all. Like, I know it sounds a bit like cliche, but fear comes up in the absence of love. So if we're ever feeling anxious or stressed or worried or fearful, those emotions are only showing up because love is not present. So if we bring love back into our body, into our state of being, then we can tackle anything.
So it's really interesting. I do some things for my own mental health and to make sure that, and the thing that allows me to feel wealthy more than anything else, because I'm really practical, right? I'm like, what do I need to do to make sure that I feel this way? What action can I? And this is something that you're a million times better at than me, because you can turn around and go, how do I feel it? I go, well, okay, great. I get that that's really important, but what action do I need to take? Yeah. And it's gratitude. It's gratitude. I had a conversation this morning with a lady who runs a business, brilliant business person, built a business incredibly. And we were talking about bringing her kids up. Her husband had left her when the kids were growing up, and she was struggling. She had to, sort of rely on state benefits and stuff like that while she was building her business. And she said something fascinating to me, Catherine, which was, while I was doing that, I volunteered for a local homeless charity 1 day a week. So I was building the business and I volunteered for this homeless charity 1 day a week. And I realized how lucky I was, despite all these struggles and the challenge of building and scaling this business, just doing that allowed me to understand that I was fortunate enough to be resourceful enough to, even though time was particularly difficult now, to get to a point where I'm building the business.
Yeah,
and that's an interesting thing for me. It's like
we forget how privileged we are to even have this conversation. We forget. Yeah, but also that can bring up some other stuff. So we do forget how privileged we are, and stepping into gratitude is so powerful. And sometimes in sitting in that space of gratitude, it can also bring up a sense of, well, why do I get to have this when other people don't?
Yeah.
And that can hold people back as well from making decisions that are going to serve them in a really powerful way, because of this belief that, well, why is that possible for me when all these people are suffering in the world?
So how do we cope with that?
Yeah, good question. I mean, that really is, I think that's where we can use wealth in a way that can support the balance of wealth inequality. And if you feel a sense of misjustice, which I do all the time, I feel this a lot. Why is it I get to choose my own business and work from home and do all these things when people can't, and people are struggling in the world, and war is going on, and all of these things. And I have to just remind myself, well, the more resourced I am, the more I can help other people, not the other way around. If I sacrifice my needs, it means that I'm not in a place of feeling fulfilled, and I can't support my family and my local communities, and I can't be investing in the stock market where I'm investing in companies that are doing good in the world. Right? It restricts my impact. But it's taken me a long time to really understand that.
So interesting.
And I think that's the thing. It's like it's drawing that circle around yourself first, so that you can then support your family and your friends, and then you can support your local communities, and then you can go on to support the world.
Yeah. The way I always square that circle in my own head is having a philosophy of do well, do good. So, and thinking about it in this way, my worth, my value is the value I give to other people. And thankfully, we've got some expertise, some knowledge, and some skills that people are able to pay for, and continue to grow the business and pay for it. And you're not alone. I feel injustice. I want the world to be a fairer place. But I'm very stoic when it comes to that, in terms of saying, what can I do to impact that? I for many years, and we stopped it when Charlotte was in year 2 university, had a podcast on kindness. And we had a really interesting journey with that, because we interviewed loads of people doing great stuff in the world. And it was basically an excuse for Charlotte and I to spend some time together. Effectively,
I love that.
But through building this podcast and building an audience, I wrote a book on kindness that we gave all the money away to charity. It raised about 50k for charity, and I was really proud of that project.
Amazing.
But the interesting thing is, when I was writing the book, I thought about what I wanted. There was a bit about the story of why I'd set it up, effectively because I didn't know how to be the parent of a teenager, and I thought if we had this project together, she had to. All the way through to this, like how do I write this book to make sure it has as much positive impact as possible? So the second chapter, after I tell the story about the podcast, is being kind to yourself. Now, I could have started with, this is how you donate charity, but I'm a firm believer in that analogy where you say, actually, the starting point is putting your, you know when you go on the plane and they say always put your oxygen mask on first, and then you can help everybody else. Actually, I think that applies to our lives. And actually, if we're kinder to ourselves, we can then have more positive impact to the world. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't think about this stuff and take action. It just means that don't neglect your needs to help others, because you can actually do both. What do you think?
Yeah, it reminds me of, I know I mentioned this to you at the start before we hit record on this conversation today, Chris, and I had the privilege of going to see Richard Branson on his Necker Island where he lives. I've been over there twice in the last few years, and the most recent occasion I went to see him, the question that I asked Richard was, how do you make decisions when you have this amount of wealth and resources? And he was talking about all these connections he has with presidents around the world and how he's very invested in global climate and the justice system in the US. And he actually gets involved in a lot of prisoners on death row and helping them to get out of like all these situations. And I was like, how do you choose between all these different things that you want to change in the world? How do you make those decisions over this one has more priority over the other one? And he said to me, with great wealth comes great responsibility. And he went on to describe this 4 circles analogy, which he's actually writing a book about with his daughter, I believe.
Okay.
And he said that the first circle to complete is the circle around yourself, followed by the circle around your friends and your family, then followed by the circle around your local community, and then followed by the circle around the world. And as he said it, and this will land for different people hearing this, as he said it, I literally felt this huge release of responsibility off my shoulders. I was like, oh, I've been looking at this in completely the wrong way, because I'm a 22 in numerology. Numerology is about the power of numbers. 22 is about the architect of change. It's about wanting to create big impact in the world. And so all of the work I do is about how can it impact as many people as possible. But with that comes a lot of responsibility. And so therefore, in my business, I was making decisions where I wasn't charging enough in my business. I was going unfulfilled financially for myself in pursuit of this vision. And when he said that, it landed so well with me that we do often, very often, look after the needs of other people before our own. But yet the impact we can have is far greater if you fill up your financial cup first, make sure that you are boundaried and that you are doing the things that fulfill you. And then you can be a better mum, be a better employee, be a better boss, be a better husband, be a better wife, But I think very often we don't allow ourselves, because of what we're taught, that we have to give to everybody else's needs first. Be the good person, look after everybody else, look after your brother, look after your sister. And I do think that there's a lot of validity in just really thinking about the order in which you are making decisions in your life. Is it that you're making decisions to make everybody else happy, or are you making decisions to give yourself permission to do things that bring you joy in your life?
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely love that. Help me understand a little bit. So this channel is dedicated to helping people at that crossroads in their life, 50s and 60s. They're thinking about a lot of the subjects we've talked about, because, as you say, they're going through this change in their life. And I'm 47 now. I've had a hard life, Catherine, so this is why I look this rough. 47 now, but certainly I've been thinking about this because of the work we do with clients. We've got a real privilege that we get to recognize that stuff's important. What factors do you think are really important when you're considering that next chapter, making change in your life and thinking about the next chapter, to help you make sure that third act, next chapter, retirement or whatever it's going to be for you, is the most successful possible?
I think the challenge with that question, when I hear that question, is I feel like a lot of people will then try and figure out, like, how do I make my life better? How do I improve it? And what happens when we ask ourselves that question is it leaves us always feeling unfulfilled, that there's always, our life could be better in some way. We could have more of something. And I actually really like the question about how do we, like, what do we subtract? What can you subtract in your life? What's draining your energy? Much easier to get rid of things that are draining than things that we can do more of or add more into our lives. So I would just be careful of putting pressure on yourself that, you know, if you want life to be more successful, well, successful in your eyes is very different to somebody else's.
100%.
So it's about not having any templates or strategies or cookie cutter approaches of which you're measuring yourself against. You know, get inspiration from conversations that you have with others about how they feel more fulfilled in life. But ultimately, it is about how you feel. And therefore, the question really is, how can I feel more successful in my life?
You raised a really important point. What am I doing currently that's not fulfilling me? It's a great question, isn't it? What am I doing that adds no value to me and I really don't enjoy it? I love that. Now, I do my research for these interviews, and I make sure that and we've known each other for a long time. We don't speak very often, but I've known you for a long time. I didn't know you were such a ardent tea lover. You know what? I've got to tell you, right? We've got a little menu in my office where you can get some really good cups of tea.
Oh, nice.
The favourite for clients when they come in, biscuit tea. Have you had a cup of biscuit? I love a biscuit tea, I've got to say. But what's your favourite cup of tea?
Do you know, I'm a bit of a tea snob. So like I really love a really good quality tea. So I love Fortnum & Mason tea is my favourite. And I actually have it right in front of me right now. And a ginger nut, like a ginger nut biscuit dunked in a cup of tea twice a day. Oh, you know so what? Good.
We've got biscuits in the office, Catherine, for clients.
I'm still waiting for my invite, Chris.
Look, I can either post you some biscuits or you can come along and see me. I'm relaxed. But you need to be quick because clients really don't eat them. But I do. So every time Cassie replaces the dark jar, she went, these clients absolutely love these biscuits. I mean, yeah, they do. They really do.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed today. I've absolutely loved this. Tell us a little bit about where people can find out a little bit more about you as my camera breaks down. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a podcast listener or a book lover, I have a book, It's Not About the Money, and a podcast called It's Not About the Money. So those are great places to connect. Or you can head over to my website, catherinemorgan.com. I write a Saturday newsletter out to our community, and I always share lots of deep questions to ask yourselves around your relationship to money, as well as some quite practical tips and tools as well. So
what question have you had the most feedback on?
What question?
What question have you asked on your newsletter that has meant that people have gone, oh God, that's tough, but that's changed my perception?
Yeah, it's just so many actually. We had one recently. Let me see if I can find it while I'm chatting to you. We get quite a few responses to our newsletters, and I love, like, Monday mornings, I read through them. I read through all the responses. But we had one interesting one recently, and I'm just trying to find the question. So in our Saturday newsletter, we have a journal prompt for like contemplation.
Yeah.
And it was something to do with mental rehearsing. And mental rehearsing is where we encourage clients to think about, well, what would your life look like if you were doing this thing? So I'll give you an example of a client of mine recently. 2 years ago, she was working for a guy who was actually in financial services, really didn't like her job. And her wife wanted to travel the world, but they couldn't figure out how to make money from it. So we spent some time together. They came to one of our wealth retreats over in Jersey, and she mapped out that she wanted to become a property investor. And so we did this evening where we asked her to imagine what it would be like to be a property investor. So she could like mentally rehearse or test out what it would feel like.
Yeah.
And so that evening I asked them to go and dress up as this version of herself amongst other people there. And so she went to the hotel reception. She went and she said, have you got anything I can wear or put on that's in the lost property box? And they said, yeah, we've got this box here. So she dug out this sun hat. She dug out some sunglasses. She borrowed the, they're like the leather bar menus and stuff that you get in your hotel room.
Yeah.
She brought that down to the dinner, and she literally walked into the room, and she was like, she put blusher on her cheeks, and she was like, oh God, I'm so hot. I've just stepped off the plane from Miami. And I was in Spain the week before, and I've just bought these properties. And she opens up her leather bounder and she shows us these pictures of these properties that she bought. And it's a great example of what we call mental rehearsing. She'd mentally rehearsed her future self as if it had already happened.
Interesting.
And then I saw her at the weekend. She spoke on our panel at the conference that we have once a year. And she, again, did a very similar thing. She sat on the stage and she was mentally rehearsing something that hadn't yet happened. And that the journaling question that we sent out connected with that was, what success scenario am I most resistant to mentally rehearsing?
Interesting. I love that. And that's one I'm going to think about quite a lot. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. I've loved our conversation. I'm pretty confident that if you're watching this, you've got loads out of that interview. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on What Happens Next. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.